Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're doing something that feels a bit like cartography, but, without the compass and the parchment.
That's a great way to put it.
Usually we take a specific event, a market crash, a scientific breakthrough, a political scandal, and we dissect it. But today, we are zooming out, way out.
We really are.
We're looking at a landscape, but it's not one made of dirt and trees and rivers. We're looking at a thought-scape.
I really like that term. It fits the ambition of what we're tackling today perfectly.
A landscape defined not by, fences or checkpoints or border guards, but by the flow of ideas. We are looking at a massive stack of research that challenges how we think about an entire region, South Asia.
And to guide us, we have this, well, it's an absolute brick of an anthology. It's called Modern South Asian Thinkers, Interface of Region and Universe.
That's a title that makes a promise.
It's a hefty piece of work, edited by Devnath Pathak and Sanjeev Kumar. And frankly, it's a necessary one. It's the kind of book that sits on your desk and it dares you to rethink your entire education.
That's a big claim. Why do you say that?
Because often when we learn about philosophy or theory in the standard Western educational tradition, we are implicitly taught that these are things that happen in Europe or maybe North America.
Right. You get your Kant, your Hegel, your Locke.
Exactly. You get the big German names, the British empiricists, maybe a bit of French existentialism. Those are the thinkers. And the rest of the world.
They have culture, they have tradition.
They have tradition, they have religion. It's a subtle but very powerful hierarchy. We study the West for truth, and we study the East for, for flavor.
That's a perfect way to put it.
And this collection just flips that on its head. It argues that South Asia, and we're talking a massive geographic sweep here, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, even bleeding into Iran. It argues this region has produced its own unique, rigorous lens on the world, a lens that is just as theoretical and just as universal as anything out of the West.
So the mission for this deep dive is, it's to unpack the mind of South Asia. We want to see how these thinkers navigated this massive collision of tradition and modernity, the East and the West.
And how they reimagined their nations not just as political entities, but as these deep spiritual and cultural projects.
Before we get to the specific people, and we have quite a cast of characters today, we need to talk about the framework. The editors use this very specific phrase, the interface of region and universe.
Yes, this is the intellectual glue holding the whole project together.
Interface sounds a bit technical, doesn't it? Like something from computer science. What does it mean in this context?
I think you can see it as a reaction against two extremes. So on one side, you have this idea of Western universalism.
Which is basically the idea that there's one single path to modernity, and it just so happens to look like Europe.
Exactly. It's often just Eurocentrism in disguise. And then on the other side, you have a kind of aggressive nativism, where people say, our culture is perfect and we don't need anything from the outside.
So one side says, become like us, and the other side says, go away.
Precisely. The interface is that collision point. It's the creative, messy middle ground where the specific local reality, the region, meets the universal human experience.
Yeah.
The universe.
So South Asian thought isn't a monolith. It's not just one thing.
Not at all. It's this incredible mix of deep, ancient streams of thought.
The source material breaks these streams down. First, we've got the oral traditions.
Right. And you have to think about the Vedas. These weren't written textbooks. They were sruti, that which is heard, knowledge passed down through generations. Or you think of the Bhakti and Sufi saints.
People like Kabir or Mirabai.
Exactly. I mean, they didn't write academic papers in some ivory tower. They sang poetry to the masses in the dust of the marketplace. That was their philosophy.
Then you have the narrative traditions.
The epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. In the West, you might learn ethics from a dry treatise on utilitarianism, right?
From Jeremy Bentham or something.
In South Asia, you learn ethics through the story of Arjuna freezing on the battlefield or Rama facing exile. It's philosophy encoded in narrative. It's lived. It's breathed.
And the final stream is syncretism.
The blending. And this is so crucial for understanding the region. You have this massive, centuries-long collision of Hindu and Islamic cultures. You can see it in Sufi shrines where Hindus and Muslims worship side by side. You see it in educational curriculums like the Darza-Nizami.
So the argument is you can't understand the thinkers we're about to discuss unless you see them operating at this interface.
You can't. They are taking these local, regional roots and using them to answer universal human questions about life, justice, and meaning.
I love that image. Rooted in the soil of the region, but the branches are reaching for the universal sky. So to make this manageable, because there are over 60 thinkers in this book and we only have an hour,
It would be a very long deep dive otherwise.
it would. So we've grouped them into three clusters. First, we're going to look at the spiritual nationalists, then the revolutionaries of faith and law, and finally, the rationalist social architects.
It's a solid roadmap. We're going from the spirit to the law to the very structure of society.
Okay, let's dive into that first group, the spiritual nationalists. These are the thinkers who looked at the concept of the nation, which, let's be honest, is a fairly modern Western political idea, and tried to give it an indigenous soul.
And you have to start with the man who essentially wrote the anthem of the Indian soul, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay.
Bankim, a titan of Bengali literature.
An absolute giant. But to understand him, you have to understand the really awkward position he was in.
He was working for the bad guys, wasn't he?
In a way, yes. He was a deputy magistrate and deputy collector under the British Raj. He was a cog in the colonial machinery.
So he saw the system from the inside.
He saw it all, the bureaucracy, the extraction of wealth, the constant condescension, and he developed this deep, simmering resentment towards it.
But, and here's where it gets really interesting, he didn't just blame the British. He didn't just say the British are evil, let's get them out. He looked inward.
He did, and his diagnosis was brutal. He blamed what he called Indian imbecility.
Ouch. That is not a word you expect a nationalist to use about his own people.
It was meant as a shock, a slap in the face. He felt that a lack of unity, a lack of physical strength, and a lack of brotherhood were the real root causes of colonization. He believed that the British didn't just conquer India because they had better guns. They conquered it because India was culturally weak.
So to fix this, you couldn't just have a political movement.
No, you needed a cultural regeneration, a spiritual one.
And his tool for this regeneration was religion.
Specifically, the transformation of the nation into a deity. This is where his novel Anandamath comes in, which of course contains the famous hymn Vande Mataram.
I bow to thee, mother.
Exactly, but the question is, who is the mother? In Bankim's vision, he fuses the geographical map of India with the mother goddess, combining imagery of Durga, the warrior goddess, Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, and Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom.
So he's telling the people, your country isn't just dirt and borders and tax codes. It is the goddess herself.
It is the living goddess, which changes the stakes completely. Patriotism becomes worship.
And serving the nation is no longer just a political choice.
It becomes a spiritual obligation. It invokes the concept of nishkam, karma, selfless action or duty, which comes straight from the Bhagavad Gita. If the nation is God, then serving the nation is your dharma. It's your sacred duty.
But the sources mention a really nuanced philosophical argument he makes here. The British and the Christian missionaries were constantly criticizing Hinduism for idol worship, calling it fetishism. Bankim actually fights back on that point.
He does, and this is a brilliant bit of intellectual judo. He actually engages with Western anthropology of his day. He argues that there is a huge difference between a fetish and an idol.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What's the difference?
He says a fetish is a primitive object that has no independent meaning. You worship a rock because you think the rock itself is magical. That's it. It begins and ends with the object.
Okay.
But an idol possesses an independent image that represents something vast and abstract. So when a Hindu bows before an idol of Durga, they aren't worshiping the clay or the stone. They're worshiping the cosmic power that the clay represents. The idol is a symbol, a gateway.
So he applies the same logic to the nation.
Exactly. When you bow to the motherland or the map of India, you aren't bowing to geography. You are bowing to the divine force of the collective people, the spirit of the nation. He argued that India needed a national religion to regenerate its culture. It was a very specific, constructed strategy to unify the people against the British.
It's powerful stuff. And it leads us perfectly to the next figure who took this spiritual nationalism and, well, turned it up to 11. Aurobindo Ghosh.
Sri Aurobindo. His life trajectory is just wild. I mean, if you looked at him as a teenager, you would never, ever guess he would become one of India's great sages.
He was sent to England at age 7, right? Completely cut off from Indian culture.
Totally. His father wanted him to be a proper English gentleman. He went to St. Paul's School in London, then King's College, Cambridge. He was a brilliant scholar of Greek and Latin, totally westernized. He even took the exam for the Indian Civil Service, the ICS, the elite bureaucracy that ran the empire.
And then the famous horse incident happens.
The horse incident. It's such a great story. He passes all the written exams with flying colors, but he has to take a writing test, and he just doesn't show up.
He ghosted the horse?
He ghosted the horse. He failed the test by not taking it. Looking back, he said it was an inner prompting. He knew deep down he wasn't meant to be a colonial bureaucrat.
So he returns to India and undergoes this complete transformation.
Complete. He learns Bengali, he learns Sanskrit, he dives into Indian philosophy, and he becomes a radical nationalist. But for Aurobindo, just like Bankim, nationalism wasn't a political program. He said it explicitly. Nationalism is a religion that has come from God.
It is God working through the nation. How is this different from the other politicians of his time? The sources keep mentioning the moderates.
The moderates were people like Dadabhai Naoroji or Gokhale. And they were great men, don't get me wrong, but they essentially wanted to create a copy of Victorian England in India. They wanted parliaments, they wanted to write petitions, they wanted gradual rights within the empire. They admired the West.
And Aurobindo.
Aurobindo looked at the West and said, no thank you. He wasn't impressed at all.
What was his critique?
He saw the West as fundamentally materialistic, mechanical, and spiritually shallow. He believed that the West was obsessed with the external world, with machines, with politics, with economics. But India, he argued, had a spiritual genius that the world desperately needed. He believed India's rise wasn't just for India. It was a cosmic mission to save the world from its own materialism.
And this is where his strategy shifted, right? He started with path of resistance, boycotts, Swadeshi, promoting local goods. But then he went deeper.
He did, because he realized that political freedom wasn't enough if the mind was still enslaved. I mean, if you kick out the British, but you still think like a British utilitarian, are you really free?
That's a powerful question.
It is. So he started talking about inner spiritual freedom. His core argument was, and this is almost a direct quote, "We must first ourselves be free in heart before our country is free."
You can't build a free nation with enslaved minds.
You can't. And eventually he withdraws from active politics entirely. He's wanted by the British police, so he escapes to Pondicherry, which was a French colony, and he spends the rest of his life developing what he called integral yoga. But his huge contribution was cementing this idea that the nation is a spiritual entity, not just a political one.
Okay, so let's move from a radical politician to a different kind of nationalist. Someone who didn't fight with speeches or yoga, but with, of all things, art history. Ananda K. Coomaraswamy.
Coomaraswamy is such a fascinating bridge figure. He was born in Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka. His father was Tamil, his mother was English, so he embodied this East-West interface in his own blood.
And he was trained as a geologist first. That's quite a career pivot.
A massive pivot, but I think he applied that scientific rigor to art. The sources describe his critique of the West as being really specific. He didn't just say the West is bad, he categorized it.
Right, the three Wests.
Yes. He broke the West down into the modern, the material mechanical, and the colonizing. And his biggest beef wasn't with Christianity or Western people in general. It was with industrialism.
Why industrialism? What was so bad about it?
For him, it destroyed what he called the caste of craftsmanship. Now, we need to be really careful here. Usually when we hear the word caste, we think of oppression, hierarchy, and discrimination.
Rightly so.
Rightly so. But Coomaraswamy was using it in a more philosophical, pre-modern sense. He argued that traditional craftsmanship gave people a habitus, a meaningful place in the world.
So the potter making a pot isn't just manufacturing a unit of commerce.
No. He is fulfilling a spiritual role. He is participating in a cosmic order passed down through generations. His work has meaning. But industrialism, it takes that man, puts him in a factory, and makes him turn the same screw 5,000 times a day for a wage.
It strips the meaning away.
It completely uproots him from his meaning and forces him into this uninspired mechanical labor. He called it mammoth worship, the worship of bigness and production for its own sake.
So for him, preserving Indian art wasn't just about aesthetics for museums.
Not at all. It was about preserving a way of life that had meaning. He fought tooth and nail against the common Western view at the time that Indian gods were monstrous because they had many arms, or that Indian art was just erotic or bizarre.
It was a profound misunderstanding.
A complete one. And he argued that you simply cannot judge Eastern art with Western eyes. Art is the expression of the passion of a specific culture. If you don't understand the philosophy and the culture, you can't possibly understand the art.
It's like trying to read a language you don't speak and then complaining that the letters look funny.
That's a perfect analogy. Later in his life, he did shift. He moved towards what's called philosophia perennis, the perennial philosophy. He started looking for the common spiritual ground between East and West, trying to bridge the civilizations. But his early work was all about reclaiming the dignity of South Asian aesthetics. He wanted South Asians to stop being ashamed of their own art.
Speaking of reclaiming dignity, we have to talk about our next thinker, Balakrishna Sama. We are shifting geography now, heading up to the Himalayas, to Nepal.
The Shakespeare of Nepal.
What a title! And he was born into the Rana regime, right? The ruling aristocracy.
He was. His birth name was Balakrishna Samsar Janga Bahadur Rana. A mouthful, and a name just dripping with privilege and power. The Ranas were the de facto rulers of Nepal for over a century.
But he did something pretty radical with that name.
He did. He shortened it to Sama.
Which means equal.
Exactly. He wanted to shed that class privilege. He looked at the Rana regime and saw decadence. They were obsessed with imitating the British. They built these huge neoclassical palaces in Kathmandu. They drank imported liquor. They indulged in what Sama called the mirth and merriment of colonial Calcutta. He felt Nepal was losing its soul.
So his project was to decolonize the mind of Nepal.
Long before that phrase was popular, yes. And his chosen weapon was theater. He believed that drama was the most effective way to reach the people and shape their consciousness. He used theater to promote the Nepali language, which was often looked down upon by the elites who preferred English or Urdu, and to promote this core concept of beer.
Bravery.
Bravery, courage, the martial spirit.
And his most famous work in this vein is Nalapani. Tell us about that.
Malapani is a musical drama about the Anglo-Nepalese War of 1814. Specifically, it focuses on the Battle of Nalapani. It dramatizes this incredible moment where a small group of Nepali soldiers, including women and children, held out against a massive, well-equipped British force.
It's a classic underdog story.
A classic. They were cut off from their water supply, they were being bombarded with cannons, but they refused to surrender. It's a foundational story for Nepali identity.
He was building a national myth.
He was constructing a national memory, an image of an unconquerable spirit. He wanted Nepalists to feel pride in their history of resistance. But here's the tension, and it fits our theme of the interface perfectly.
How so?
To tell this intensely Nepali story, he used Shakespearean structures. The blank verse, the five-act structure, the tragic hero. He was deeply influenced by Western literature.
So he used the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, so to speak.
In a way, yes. He loved Shakespeare. But he used those Western tools to try and purge what he saw as foreign cultural contamination from Nepal. It just shows that you can't really escape the interface. Even when you're fighting the influence of the West, you're often using its tools to do so.
So we've seen how religion, art, and theater were used to build this thought-scape of the nation. Now let's shift gears to our second cluster, faith as law and revolution.
Right. Here we see thinkers using Islamic frameworks to reimagine society.
And we have to start with a figure who I think is criminally underdiscussed in the West, the frontier Gandhi, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan.
Badshah Khan, a towering figure. Literally, he was over 6 feet tall, and metaphorically. He was a Pashtun from the Northwest Frontier Province. And we have to address the stereotype here right away.
The stereotype of the violent tribesman.
Exactly. The British, and frankly many others, viewed the Pashtuns as inherently violent, ungovernable, obsessed with revenge and blood feuds. It was the colonial justification for constant military control of the region.
And Ghaffar Khan spent his entire life shattering that stereotype.
But he did. He built an army of nonviolent soldiers, which sounds like a complete oxymoron.
It does. The Kudai Khidmatgars.
The servants of God. They wore these distinctive red uniforms, so they were known as the Red Shirts. At their peak, there were tens of thousands of them.
And they took a very specific oath.
A revolutionary oath. They swore to abstain from violence and, crucially, to abstain from family feuds. This was seismic in a culture where Badal revenge is a central tenet of the traditional code of Pashtunwali.
Now, people often call him the frontier Gandhi, which implies he just borrowed his ideas from Gandhi. But the source material is very clear on this.
It is. His nonviolence was indigenous. It wasn't borrowed. It came directly from his faith.
From the Quran.
Directly from the Quran. He preached that patience and righteousness were the weapons of the Prophet Muhammad. He argued that no earthly power, no army, no empire could stand against those spiritual weapons. He showed that nonviolence wasn't just some Hindu or Jain concept. It could be deeply, radically Islamic.
And politically, he was a fascinating figure because he vehemently opposed the partition of India.
He was a staunch opponent. He pleaded with the Congress Party not to agree to it. He felt that partition would tear his people apart, and he was right. The new border, the Durand Line, cut right through the Pashtun lands.
So after Pakistan was created, he became a critic of the new state.
A fierce critic,
Yeah.
he fought against the centralization of power, especially the one-unit policy, which tried to merge all the diverse provinces into a single administrative bloc, erasing local identity.
He wanted autonomy for his people.
He wanted Pakhtunistan, an autonomous province for the Pashtuns, and for this, he spent a huge amount of his life in Pakistani prisons, more time than he'd spent in British prisons. He famously said, "Education is rebellion." For him, teaching a Pashtun to think for himself was the most dangerous, most revolutionary thing you could do to the establishment.
From the mountains of the frontier, let's move to the intellectual cafes of Iran, and to the man who, in many ways, set the stage for the 1979 revolution, Ali Shariati.
His writing is electric. He's often called the ideologue of the Iranian Revolution. You simply can't understand 1979 without understanding his influence.
What's fascinating is how he rebranded Islam. He didn't see it as just a set of rituals or a private, quiet faith.
No, not at all. For Shariati, Islam was a revolutionary ideology. He looked at Shia Islam specifically. He took the concept of imamat, which means leadership.
Right, and traditionally, for many Shias, this involved waiting.
Yes, waiting for the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, to return and bring justice to the world. It often encouraged a passive, quietist stance. Shariati said no.
He flipped the script.
He completely flipped it. He argued that imamat implies the responsibility of the masses to lead now, to become the agents of change. He politicized the faith, arguing that a true Muslim has a sacred duty to fight oppression in all its forms.
And he also built on the work of Jalal al-Ahmad regarding Westoxication.
Garbzaji. What a great word, Westoxication. It sounds like a poisoning.
It does.
And that's exactly how they viewed it, the disease of blindly imitating the West. Shariati argued that Iranians were losing their souls to this imitation. They were becoming mimic men, consuming Western culture but producing nothing authentic themselves. But, and this is so important, he didn't just want to hand power to the old-school clergy, the ulema.
Right, he had this concept of the enlightened soul.
Yes, he argued that an enlightened soul, a true leader, doesn't have to be a turbaned cleric with decades of religious training. It can be anyone. It can be an uneducated person in a village who feels a deep sense of social responsibility. He was proposing a third way.
Not the traditional clerical rule, but also not Western secularism.
Exactly. A modern revolutionary Islam committed to truth and social justice, a modern sociology that was still rooted in faith.
It is tragic in a way, considering how things played out after the revolution.
That is the tragedy of Shariati. He died just before the revolution, and his more democratic, populist ideas were largely co-opted by the clerical establishment. But his intellectual project to fuse modern sociology with Islamic fervor remains incredibly influential.
Now let's look at a very different figure in this cluster, someone who worked within the system, not to overthrow it, but to synthesize it. Alvin Robert Cornelius.
Cornelius is a unicorn in this landscape, a total anomaly. He was the Chief Justice of Pakistan, and he was Roman Catholic.
A Christian Chief Justice in the land of the pure. That sounds almost impossible.
And yet, he was one of the biggest proponents of Islamic law in the country's history. He developed this idea of being a constitutional Muslim.
What did he mean by that?
He believed that as a loyal citizen and judge of Pakistan, a state explicitly founded on Islamic principles, he was bound by the Constitution to uphold and interpret Muslim law. But it went deeper than just duty. He believed in it philosophically. He spent his career trying to synthesize English common law, which Pakistan inherited from the British, with Sharia.
What did he see in Sharia that he felt was missing from English law?
Compassion. He argued that Western law had become too technical, too rigid. It was a machine that processed cases but often missed the human element. He would cite the Quran, specifically Surah al-Shura, to argue that true justice requires forgiveness and compassion. He believed that a legal system without morality is just a cold mechanism for punishment.
He also defended the Jirga system, right? The traditional tribal council.
He did, which was highly controversial. The British and many Pakistani modernizers hated the Jirga. They saw it as barbaric mob justice. But Cornelius argued that the Jirga was a form of indigenous justice.
Meaning it was culturally appropriate?
Exactly. He argued it focused on restoration and community harmony rather than just penalizing the individual. He believed it was more effective for the tribes than a foreign legal code imposed from London that they didn't understand or respect.
It's amazing. He was defending the indigenous culture of Pakistan against Western legal imposition, even though he himself was a religious minority.
He was suspicious of Western interference in general. The sources mention he was very critical of the U.S. and the CIA. You have to remember the U-2 spy plane incident happened in Pakistan on his watch. He wanted to protect Pakistan's legal sovereignty. He didn't want Pakistan to be a legal colony of the West.
Okay, we have covered the spiritual nationalists and the faith-based revolutionaries. Now let's turn to our final cluster, the rationalists and social architects.
These are the thinkers who focused on justice, democracy, and reason.
And we have to start with the absolute giant of Indian social justice, Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar.
Dr. Ambedkar, the architect of the Indian Constitution, a man of just staggering intellect, but also the man who mounted the most profound challenge to the very foundations of Hindu society.
We often hear about Ambedkar as a political leader or a lawyer, but the deep dive sources highlight his work as a historian and sociologist, specifically his theory on the origins of the Shudras.
Right. His book, Who Were the Shudras? This was a radical, explosive piece of historical revisionism. The traditional caste system places Shudras at the very bottom, and the orthodox view was that this was divinely ordained, created by the god Brahma from his feet.
And Ambedkar said, "Show me the evidence."
He put on his detective hat, he went through the ancient texts, and he argued that the Shudras weren't originally a separate lower class. He argued they were originally part of the Kshatriya, the warrior and ruling class.
So what happened? How did they fall so far?
Ambedkar argued that they were denied religious rights by the Brahmins due to ancient political feuds. Specifically, they were denied the Upanayana ceremony, the sacred thread ceremony. Because they were denied this key religious right, they lost their social status over generations. His point was crucial. This hierarchy isn't a divine mandate, it's a social and political lockout. It's man-made history.
And because it was man-made, it could be unmade.
Exactly. He demystified the oppression. But this research eventually led him to a devastating conclusion. He concluded that Hinduism's core flaw was that inequality was legal and penal within the religion itself. You couldn't reform it from the inside because the scriptures themselves codified the inequality.
Which led to his famous conversion.
His move to what he called scientific Buddhism. This is a key term the source material uses. He didn't just become a Buddhist in a conventional sense. He reinterpreted Buddhism for the modern age. He stripped away a lot of the mystical elements, things like karma as a cosmic debt or reincarnation, and focused intensely on the social ethics of the Buddha.
He saw the Buddhist Sangha, the community of monks, as the model for a perfect democratic society.
He did. He found the ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity embedded in the Buddha's original teachings 2,000 years earlier.
And he made a crucial distinction between his vision and communism.
A vital distinction. You have to remember, this is the mid-20th century. Communism is the hot, new, revolutionary idea. Ambedkar looked at it and critiqued it. He said communism wants equality, but it is willing to sacrifice liberty to get it. It uses the state's terror, it uses force.
It forces you to be equal, whether you like it or not.
Right. Ambedkar believed the Buddha offered the only path to have both equality and liberty, because it worked through a change of disposition. It changed the human mind from within. It was a revolution of consciousness, not just a revolution of guns.
That is a fascinating and powerful connection. From Ambedkar, let's go back to Nepal, to a statesman who really embodied the tension between the artist and the politician, B.P. Koirala.
Vishweshwar Prasad Koirala, he is a legend in Nepal, the first democratically elected prime minister. But like so many in this deep dive, he spent a huge chunk of his life in prison or in exile.
His philosophy was democratic socialism, but the sources make a point that he differed from the Marxists next door in China or in parts of India.
He did. It came down to his politics-first argument. Marxists usually focus on economics, they say. Fix the economy, redistribute the land, seize the means of production, and the politics will sort itself out. Koirala said, no, that's backwards.
As you flip the priority.
He argued that in a country like Nepal, which was under an autocratic monarchy, the primary problem was political tyranny. You must have democracy first. He argued that economic development without democracy is just a more efficient form of tyranny.
This is a direct critique of the King of Nepal's narrative.
Absolutely. The monarchy was always arguing that they were developing the country, building roads and dams, so they didn't need the messiness of democracy. The classic benevolent dictator argument. Koirala saw right through that.
But later in life, he did something that shocked his supporters. He called for national reconciliation with the king.
A very controversial move.
Why would he do that? After the king had imprisoned him for years.
He looked at the geopolitical map. It was the height of the Cold War. You had a rising China to the north, a powerful India to the south, the U.S. and the Soviets playing their great game. He argued that if Nepalists kept fighting each other, king versus people, the nation itself might disappear. It might be swallowed up by its giant neighbors.
So he was putting national survival first.
He believed that national security depended on democracy, yes, but it also depended on national unity. He was willing to compromise with his oppressor to save the nation's very existence. It's the mark of a true statesman, putting the country above your own political vendetta.
And we shouldn't forget his other side, his literature.
Right. In his autobiography, he barely even talks about his writing, but he was a brilliant novelist. In novels like Sumnima, he explores human freedom, psychology, and passion in a way that rejects social chauvinism and dogma. He was fighting for freedom on two fronts, the political freedom of the citizen and the emotional inner freedom of the individual.
We have one final thinker to discuss. And he is a bit of an outlier. He wasn't a prime minister or a chief justice or a famous writer. He was a humble farmer in Bangladesh, Aroj Ali Matubar.
The rural philosopher. I love his story. It's just a testament to the sheer power of a curious mind. He had no formal higher education to speak of. He was entirely self-taught.
What was a catalyst for his journey? What set him on this path?
A deep personal tragedy. His mother died. Matubar wanted to take a photograph of her body as a memory, a keepsake. But in rural Bengal at that time, the religious orthodoxy considered photography haram forbidden. The village elders and religious leaders were completely scandalized.
And they boycotted his mother's funeral.
They did. Can you imagine the pain? It was a brutal act. And it radicalized him. Not towards violence, but towards questions. He vowed to understand the truth behind the superstitions that had caused him so much suffering. He became a self-taught truth seeker.
And he started using Socratic questioning against the very establishment that had hurt him.
He did. And his propositions, which the sources list, are incredibly sharp. They are simple, but just devastating in their logic.
What are some examples?
Well, he asks things like, if the soul is separate from the body, why should we fear death? Since it's not me who suffers, the body suffers, but my essence, my soul, is separate. Or he'd tackle the problem of evil. If God is almighty, why do humans suffer? And if humans are free to create their own suffering, then is God truly almighty?
These are the classic questions of theodicy, the big philosophical questions, but coming from a self-taught farmer in rural Bangladesh.
Exactly. And he made this key distinction between opinion, which he defined as blind faith, and knowledge, which is true belief based on evidence and reason. He didn't just use Western science either. He used the logic of myths against themselves. He would analyze the Ramayana and other religious texts anthropologically. He challenged the entire establishment simply by thinking for himself.
He showed that you don't need a PhD to be a philosopher.
You just need the courage to ask why.
So we have traversed this incredible landscape, from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea. From mystic poetry to constitutional law, we've looked at spiritual nationalists, Islamic revolutionaries, and rationalist architects.
It is a vast, almost dizzying array of voices.
What is the common thread here? If you had to synthesize this thought-scape, what does it look like?
I think the common thread is that all these thinkers refuse to be mimic men. That's a term that comes up. They didn't just copy the West. They saw the West. They understood it. Many of them were educated there. But they rejected its claim to be the only universal truth. They refused to believe that to be modern, you had to be European.
But, and this is equally important, they didn't just blindly accept their own traditions either.
No, not at all. They weren't just saying old is gold. Ambedkar took a hammer to the caste system. Ghaffar Khan challenged the Pashtun code of revenge. Matubar challenged rural superstition. Bankim challenged what he saw as Indian passivity.
They were deeply critical of their own homes.
Exactly. They were all building a third way, a middle path. whether it was Ambedkar's scientific Buddhism, or Cornelius's constitutional Islam, or Koirala's democratic socialism. They were all trying to build an interface, a way to be modern without being Western, a way to be rooted in your own culture without being backward-looking.
It's a powerful reminder that globalization doesn't have to mean the whole world looking like a generic airport lounge.
Precisely. We often assume the future looks like the West, but these thinkers suggest a different possibility, a future with what you might call multiple modernities.
And that leads us to our final provocation for you, the listener. We're living in a world of, well, extreme polarization, environmental collapse, a real crisis of meaning for so many people. And we usually look for answers in data, in technology, in Western philosophy.
We do. But what if we really engaged with these indigenous epistemologies? What if the answer to our toxic polarization lies in something like Ambedkar's concept of matriarchal as a mode of being? What if a key to our endless cycle of global violence lies in Ghaffar Khan's nonviolent, service-oriented Islam?
What if the answer to our loss of meaning lies in Kumaraswamy's idea of sacred art and the dignity of craftsmanship?
It's a challenging thought. Perhaps the answers we're desperately looking for aren't in Silicon Valley or in European salons. Perhaps they're waiting for us right here in the thought-scape of South Asia.
It's a landscape definitely worth exploring. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep thinking, keep questioning boundaries, and don't be afraid to look off the map. We'll see you next time.